Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Entrepreneurial Finance. Term sheets for business ideas, especially shares and rights of venture capitalists or capitalists in general. Looking in more detail into a term sheet, I like to start looking at the shares on the one hand and the rights, so this chapter altogether, because shares and rights are normally bundled or associated with each other. So let's look at that in more detail. And if you look at that, the first thing you have to do is you have to understand the relationship between the VC or the capitalist in general and the entrepreneur or the company in more general. So what normally you have to do is you have to understand what the entrepreneur and the company wants and what the VC wants. Look at an example. Facebook again. Mark Zuckerberg once said, as a founder, I want to have control over my company. You can always say that. He has an employee. This is Andrew McCullum. And he says, as an early employee, I pass on high wages, so I don't want to earn too much money. However, I want to participate in the value we create. So he's really into value creation of Facebook. And the last one there, Peter Thiel, as one of the first investors, he says, as an investor, I want to participate in profits and have control over my investment. So basically also participate in value creation of this company. Is this always the same? Do they want the same thing? Probably not, as you can see. This is why we have different types of shares to address these various positions. If we look into that a little further, we probably have to differentiate the situation in the US and the situation we face in Germany, because we have slightly different legal rights, and this leads to different kinds of stocks or shares which are common in our business environment. So let's look at the US situation first and the types of shares we have there. The first one is common shares. Common shares is, very common. This is the shares which you normally have as a founder, and they represent ownership at the same time. So Mark Zuckerberg starting his company, owning, say, 100%, he has 100% control, he has 100% common shares. Now when he has a partner and the partner has 20%, maybe he also has common shares, so they divide up shares and control in the same way. This is the easy start. Then it gets more complicated because you also have preferred shares, preferred stock. And preferred stock normally has a higher claim on asset and earnings. On the other hand, when it comes to voting, normally preferred stock is not preferred. Common stock or common shares have higher voting rights, and this is the main difference. So they are preferred in earnings, and this is why they are preferred stocks. And dividends, for example, must be paid out to preferred shareholders first and then to all the others. Thirdly, we have stock options. Stock options are not really shares. So whoever owns a stock option doesn't have shares, but he has the right to buy those shares at a defined time for a defined price. So this is what you do when you want to give someone shares potentially in the future, when, for example, this person works for you for a certain time as some kind of incentive mechanism. And the last one is convertible loan. This is not stock or shares at the first moment. This is a loan, but it can be converted. So normally it's like a loan which can be paid back by the company in defined time. However, when it is not paid back, it can also be converted into stock by the lender. So this is the 4 types of shares. And if we want to understand why to use these 4 types of shares, we have to look at them a little more closely. So first of all, founder shares. It's very common that founders have common stock because this is the regular voting. So if Mark Zuckerberg says he wants to have control, he has to have common shares. For employees, it is possible that they have common shares, also voting rights. Sometimes they do not have it. Preferred stock. Normally, founders do not have preferred stock. They have common shares because they want to remain in control. However, sometimes they can also negotiate some higher rights of dividend payments or whatever. So they might also want to have preferred stock. Same with employees. Stock options, same thing. Founders might get some stock options in special cases of financing. So if they reach certain milestones, they get additional shares. So this is why it is also possible that founders and employees have stock options, especially when it comes for employees, when it comes to so-called employees stock ownership plans. This is when employees get stock options. This is mainly a question of the tax structure in the respective countries. And convertible loans is normally very uncommon for founders and employees because normally founders and employees don't want to give their own company a loan and afterwards convert it. Then normally they put it into equity. So this gives you a better understanding of the shares. Looking at this more closely, you can also look at the rights attached to the shares. So first of all, common stock, again, looking at the information rights. Common stocks have the highest information rights because the highest control, so they need to know everything. And with preferred and stock options, you can negotiate information rights. Convertible loans normally have like the same information rights as banks have. Same with dividends. Common stocks have dividend rights. You can negotiate that with preferred stocks. You can even negotiate higher dividend rights with preferred stocks. Stock options, convertible loans normally do not have dividend rights. Voting rights, that's the biggest difference between common and preferred stocks. Common stocks have them totally, the same amount as the percentage the shareholder has. Preferred stocks normally have less voting rights. Might be no voting rights, in my case it is, at least less voting rights. Stock options, convertible loans also do not have voting rights. Are you able to convert one type of share or stock into the other? Yes, you are. You might be able to convert preferred stock into common stock. You might be able to convert convertible loan, especially, this is why they are convertible, into real shares. And stock options, you might also do that. As I said, you do not necessarily need to do that. It really depends on how the company develops. And the last one is the so-called preemption rights. Who has preemption rights? Well, basically this is negotiable for everyone. So preemption right means 100% of the company. If someone wants to sell 10%, who's able or who has the right to buy the 10%? Well, if the guy who wants to sell 10% finds someone outside the company, but the others have so-called preemption rights, then they can make this 10% empty before, so they can basically buy these 10% before someone else has the right to buy these shares. This is a very common way of shareholders to remain in control of the question, who's going to buy the shares of the entire company. This is the US situation, as I said that before. Now we get into the German situation, and the German situation is slightly different, not totally different. And the biggest difference is not common stocks, that's the same basically. But in Germany you also have the so-called virtual stocks. And virtual stocks, you have 4 different types of virtual stocks. The first one, and excuse the German words right now, is the so-called Unterbeteiligung. There's a shareholder who holds 10%, but it is not, all the 10% is not his. He also gives 2% away to someone else, which is the so-called Unterbeteiligung. Normally, other shareholders might have to allow to that, and then he can do that. And this is, and the Unterbeteiligung normally doesn't have the voting rights the regular shareholder has. The second one is the so-called virtuelle Beteiligung. Again, German words, virtual stock, basically. These shares they can gain from an exit. So they're converted in case of exit. In all the other cases, they won't be converted. This is why they are virtual. So someone has those shares or doesn't really have the shares, only virtually. When the company is being sold, he can participate in this sale. The third one is, and the fourth one is the so-called stille Beteiligung. It's the typical and atypical, so typische und atypische stille Beteiligung. And the typical one participate basically in the profits and the dividends. So like the normal shareholders, the so-called atypische stille Beteiligung might also have to participate in losses too. So there's more to that than in the US. There's virtual stock. However, you normally do not have the bigger differentiation between common and preferred stock, and especially between different kinds of preferred stock, which you can find in the US. Stock options basically the same, convertible loan basically the same. The only thing which you have to pay attention to as a founder is the tax structure which is associated to all the stocks, because it might make sense to give stock options in one country, it might not make sense to give stock options in the other country. This is really dependent on the tax structure in these countries. Let's look at those shares more closely again. Which are the rights? What are the rights attached to these shares? Well, again, it's the same picture. Common stock, virtual stock, stock option, convertible loan. Which information rights do they have? Highest with common stocks, and with the others, if you're a shareholder, you might have information rights. For convertible loan, it's the same. You're a bank, first of all. Same with the dividend rights. Dividend rights, common shareholders normally have them. Preferred or virtual stockholders, in that case, you can negotiate everything. Even higher, even lower. It really depends on which kind of virtual stock you have. Stock options, convertible loans, you do not have dividend rights. Voting rights, same thing, full control you have with common stock. You don't have control with virtual stock normally, especially with the so-called stille Beteiligung. Same with stock options and convertible loans. And conversion rights, well, actually, you can't really convert virtual stock into other shares. So you can't convert stille Beteiligung into common stock. But you can convert stock options, and for sure you can convert a so-called convertible loan. That's part of the name. Preemption rights, again, when someone wants to sell parts of the companies, you can negotiate it with all four types of shares. And now you can see why it is important to differentiate them, because then you can basically find a structure according to what the different people want. And let's, at the very end of this chapter, look at one case, look at the employee of Facebook and him wanting to leave that company. Because the guy started with Facebook, he said, I do not care for salary too much. I want to create value and I want to participate in value creation. So how are you going to do that? Do you give him common shares? Well, actually, probably not. At least if you give him common shares, then you would like to have vesting rights, because this prevents leaving the employees too early. what might happen if you just gave him common shares without vesting rights, he gets 5% of Facebook. Next day he says, I'm out. Can't do anything. If vesting rights are associated with that, then you can define a so-called probation period, which is basically the cliff he has to jump over. So within the probation period, which might be, or in most cases, 6 months, he gets nothing. So if he leaves within the first 6 months, he gets no shares. All the shares will be taken away from him. Both cases possible. And there's an additional vesting period, which can be, well, up to, let's say, 36 months. You can define that quite longer. And in that period, you gain a fraction of the assigned shares per month or quarter, or it'll be taken away from you. Both cases, again, possible. So let's take this example, and it is, well, exemplified numbers, so we don't know the right numbers. Andrew McCollum, that's what we know. He joined Facebook in February 2004 and he left in September 2006. Let's say if he has vesting conditions, saying he had 10,000 shares in this share ownership program. He has 6 months cliffs associated with that, and then 36 months vesting period. Let's look at that. For the first 6 months, he gets nothing. For the remaining time, he gets the part he earns. So if he has a 36 months vesting period, in total he remained from February 2004 to September 2006. If I'm right, he remained 31 months. 31 minus the 6 months cliff is 25. So he gets 25 36th of his 10,000 shares, which in the end is 6,944 shares. And at the same time, he loses 3,056 shares because he left earlier. This is to prevent people from going out of this company too early, and this is basically a good sign for why you should use this, which might look at you very complicated shareholder structure in your company, in order to prevent this, or let's put it positively, in order to address what the various shareholders want with the venture.